Well, the breaking news of the night is that Donald Trump has lost another very important vote. That makes 2 nights in a row of breaking news about Donald Trump being on the losing side of a very important vote. Last night, the voters of Wisconsin crushed Donald Trump and Elon Musk's candidate for a state Supreme Court justice, and instead elected the candidate supported by the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, Susan Crawford, to be the next elected Supreme Court justice in the state of Wisconsin. But tonight, the Republican-controlled United States Senate made history by voting against Donald Trump for the first time. Donald Trump lost the vote in the United States Senate tonight. 4 Republican senators joined all the Democrats in voting against Donald Trump tonight in the United States Senate, 51-48, in favor of a resolution that would nullify any claim of presidential authority to impose tariffs on Canada. This is the first big crack in the wall of Republican senatorial support for Donald Trump. Republicans voting against the Trump-Canadian tariffs in the Senate were Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Susan Collins, Senator Lisa Murkowski, and Senator Rand Paul. Donald Trump began his day with a social media post attacking those 4 senators, and still they defied Donald Trump. Rand Paul said as clearly as I have been saying for years the truth that other Republicans dare not say, that tariffs are taxes on the American people.
Tariffs are a terrible mistake. They don't work. They will lead to higher prices. They are a tax, and they have historically been bad for our economy.
Donald Trump's secret is out. Tariffs are a tax on American consumers only. Foreign countries don't pay those taxes. Trump supporters wouldn't believe me when I was telling them that for years, but now Republicans are saying it loud and saying it clear. Mitch McConnell said it today. Now the financial networks like CNBC are saying it constantly. And tonight, the Wall Street Journal, in its editorial in response to Donald Trump's announcement of the new tariffs today, said tariffs are taxes, pure and simple. Back in the 20th century, a nerdy right-wing Republican in Washington who never held elected office, named Grover Norquist, bent the entire Republican Party in Washington to his will. It was pathetic to watch. In effect, he forced them to sign a pledge to never vote for an increase in taxes of any kind. And every single Republican member of the United States Senate signed, or Grover Norquist ordered them to sign. Every Republican presidential candidate signed, or Grover Norquist required them to sign in order to be Republican candidates. And almost every Republican member of the House of Representatives signed exactly where Grover Norquist ordered them to sign, to never, ever, ever support an increase in taxation of any form. Republicans lived in fear of this guy, that guy right there in the middle. At the time, I declared Grover Norquist to be the most powerful unelected person in Washington because on one issue anyway, he had complete control over one of our political parties. Former Republican presidential campaign manager, my friend Stuart Stevens, wrote a book about the Grover Norquist-controlled Republican Party after Donald Trump was elected president, and he titled that book, "It Was All a Lie." It turns out Grover Norquist was and is a lie. Grover Norquist has revealed himself not to be a principled anti-tax crusader, as has every Republican member of the Senate and House of Representatives, because at some point, every single one of them has supported Donald Trump's increase in taxation on Americans through tariffs, which are sales taxes administered only on goods imported into this country and paid only by Americans in this country. Every one of those Republicans has either actively supported those taxes by Donald Trump or held their cowardly silence about them. And Grover Norquist, the nerd who was once perceived as the toughest Republican operative in Washington, is hiding tonight in his permanent cocoon of cowardly silence about Donald Trump's sales taxes, Donald Trump's tariffs. The last time the gasoline tax was increased in the United States of America was 32 years ago, with only Democratic votes in the House and the Senate. And Grover Norquist was outraged that Democrats, and Democrats only, voted to increase the gasoline tax in America. In 1993, the Democrats voted to increase the gasoline tax by 4.3 cents. And Grover Norquist screamed at the top of his histrionic anti-tax lungs about what a horrible burden an additional 4.3 cents a gallon of gasoline would be in America, what it would burden it would be for American drivers. And I'll never forget that outrage about the 4.3 cent increase in the gasoline tax, because I was working in the United States Senate at the time as the chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, and I personally negotiated that number, 4.3 cents, with the staff of a Democratic senator who was the final holdout on the gas tax increase, the final vote that we needed to get it through the committee. We actually started off by trying to increase it by a dime, but in the desperate last-minute negotiations to get that final vote in the Senate Finance Committee, the most I could get was 4.3 cents, which at the time was roughly a 2% increase in the cost of a gallon of gasoline, 2%. And Grover Norquist went crazy. And every Republican in the Senate and the House, including Mitch McConnell then in the Senate, claimed that the Democrats were crushing the American consumer with that increase in the gasoline tax, 4.3 cents. Newt Gingrich used it in his insurgent campaign to win control of the House of Representatives for Republicans in the next election for the first time in 40 years. And tonight, Newt Gingrich supports 54% sales taxes that Donald Trump is imposing, and 25% sales taxes that Donald Trump is imposing, and 10% sales taxes that Donald Trump is imposing on everything the United States of America imports from anywhere in the world. That 4.3 cent increase in the gasoline tax in 1993 was part of a complex deficit reduction legislation bill, huge bill, signed by President Clinton that included spending cuts and tax increases aimed at reducing the deficit, which is exactly what it successfully did. It was at the time the biggest tax increase in history, but that record has been broken. Broken by Donald Trump. Republican Mike Pence, who signed Grover Norquist's anti-tax pledge in order to win his seat in the House of Representatives, tweeted tonight, the Trump tariff tax is the largest peacetime tax hike in U.S. history. These tariffs are nearly 10 times the size of those imposed during the Trump-Pence administration and will cost American families over $3,500 per year. And so tonight, we have a new winner for biggest tax increase in history, Donald Trump and his faithful and mostly cowardly supporters in Congress.